So with all that said, let's have a big round of applause and we'll kick off tonight's event. Thank you.
All right. Is this on? You guys can hear me? Can we turn the lights down, or do we want to leave those on? Might be able to see the screen better. I don't know. Anyway, all right, yeah, so my name's Gurmukh Bhasin, and a couple months ago, Lynette invited me to come give what is now my third kind of talk here at Gnomon on a Thursday night. The last two were some of the work that I did on Star Citizen, so I'm definitely excited to be here to share a bit of my personal work and kind of what gets me up in the morning, gets me excited to be a designer and create my own stuff. This image you see here, this interior of the vehicle, this interior is what I created for tonight's talk, so it's brand new art that hasn't been seen yet. And I'm going to walk you guys through the process of how I created the exterior of the vehicle as well as the interior, and as well as show some of the model design files, my workflow, how I render and use Photoshop as well as some of my design principles and the way I like to think about concept design and the way I do my work. So yeah, here's a little outline of what we're going to cover tonight. Talking a little bit about my design beginnings, like Lynette said, that I used to work as an architect and kind of found my way into entertainment design. So started undergrad in 2000, 17 years ago, so my design career has taken a long, windy road to get to where I am today. Show just a little bit of the art, Star Citizen art, just in case people aren't too familiar with it. Won't spend too much time on that. Show a little bit of the personal work I've been doing since I left working at Cloud Imperium, and then show the in-depth SWAT truck exterior, and then as well the SWAT truck interior. So just really quick, started my design career back in 2000, where I decided to study architecture as my bachelor's degree at Arizona State University. And one of the reasons I really like to show this is it kind of just shows the progression of where I started to where I am today. And even though back in 2000, the computer wasn't used that much in design, I was still really interested and really excited about exploring design in 3D, where you can see I was building these hand wood models and really being able to get down into the space and kind of get a good feeling and understanding of what it might be like to be in this building, and really explore design in a three-dimensional way. After my bachelor's degree, graduated in 2004, I went on to get my master's degree at a school in downtown LA called Southern California Institute of Architecture, also known as SCI-Arc. And that's where I started using Maya as a design tool. Back then, I think it was Maya 6 or something like that. It was a super early version of Maya, still made by Alias. And we weren't really taught the proper way to use Maya, to model in Maya. It was more using it as a way to explore designs and kind of have the computer help you think of designs that you may not think of on your own. And SCI-Arc is known to be very experimental, so buildings like the Disney Concert Hall and things like that are the types of work that the teachers are doing at SCI-Arc, and a lot of the students that leave there end up going more in that direction. After that, I worked at a architecture firm in Hollywood where we did projects all around the world, man-made islands in Abu Dhabi, and projects in India and China and Egypt, and really huge developments, shopping malls, just really big, fun projects. But in 2009, as I'm sure most of you know, the economy tanked and architecture was hit really bad, and I was laid off from my job, and which was kind of blessing in disguise because I actually came to an art gallery here at Gnomon and kind of discovered for myself concept art and was like, oh man, this is what I want to do for a living. So It kind of took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do, even after getting a bachelor's and a master's. But then at the same time, I had a lot of student loan debt and was basically just like working on my portfolio on the side, and then started working at this small architecture studio in Santa Monica called ACAR Studios, and we got to work on some really cool projects here locally. So the biggest one that we worked on before I left was LAX Terminal 2 redesign. So if you guys ever fly out of there, Virgin Atlantic to London or England, and a couple other places, and you go through Terminal 2, I worked on that project for about 1.5 to 2 years, and really got to see a lot of the design work through a certain level, and then really cool to see it build. But in 2013, I decided my time had come to make the big, scary leap, and I kind of quit working in architecture to pursue concept design. And in 2013, I didn't really have a job lined up or anything, and just kind of just took the leap of faith. And in 2014, a friend of mine, David Hobbins, he was working at Cloud Imperium Games LA on Star Citizen as a concept artist, and he asked if I wanted to join him. There was a position open, so I was able to join the studio. And I spent about 2.5 years there designing spaceships for Star Citizen. So I'm not going to go too in-depth into that, but I definitely wanted to show you some of my favorite projects throughout my time there. And I always like to say, even though like a lot of this work is my work, there's always a team involved of writers and designers and game designers and all these people that kind of contribute to this. So I always like to try and make sure that credit's given to the others as well that helped me get these beautiful images and cool spaceships up and running. So this one's the Vanguard. It's definitely a fun project for me. One of the things I really liked about it was I got to design these 3 variants. So the blue variant is the base variant, which was the one that basically started the design and went through the whole process. And then the green one is the bomber variant. So the turret switched out with rockets, and then inside it has torpedoes, and then this black and yellow one is a electronic war variant. So this ship here, I really got to not only design the exterior, got to also do the interior, and then do the exterior and interior for all 3 variations. So definitely spent a lot of time on this one, but it was a lot of fun and challenging and very rewarding. As you can see, part of my architecture background and the way that my mind works, I really like to get into the engineering of these things, figure out how they work, how the spaces feel, how somebody would interact with the spaces, and really just kind of take it as far as I can, using 3D as my design tool to really figure out what this thing is. And my goal is to always make images and presentation work that brings the viewer into the space. So I don't know, maybe I'm biased because it's my work, but every time I see these images, it almost transforms me or transports me into that ship, and I almost like automatically know what it feels like to be in there, how it is to walk around, to lay in the beds, to do whatever. So this one right here is another one of my favorites from the project. And it didn't end up getting used in the project, but I always liked this feeling of this cold. It's for a cargo ship, so this cold kind of storage container feeling, and how the designs of the shapes and the materials and the lighting and all that gives a feeling of just kind of like cold storage where you would transport your produce and stuff to supermarkets, but in space. This one here, the design of this ship, the Archimedes, went through a lot of people's hands. Originally started with a concept design by Ryan Church, and then maybe like 3 or 4 other people touched it, and eventually I did a few design parts to it, designing this intake, changing up the wings a bit, doing the livery for the skin, and then also just changing up a little bit of the interior. But one of the really fun things I enjoyed about this project was creating these 2 images, the racing image, of the Archimedes winning, to the finish line, and then this other image of Archimedes on some utopian planet where some millionaire playboy is taking his date to some fancy opera or space opera or something. So that's what I always try to do as well with my renders or my images, is to kind of tell a story with the image that I've created. This one was actually the first project that I worked on when I joined the company in 2014, and was to make like a luxury yacht version of a spaceship. So using my background in architecture to kind of hint with materials and lighting and finishes to kind of show luxury and what it would feel like if this was like a yacht, but in space. So, and if you guys ever get to go to the LA studio, this image right here, along with the sunset images with the 3 vanguards, are printed full wall size. So this one was 14 feet by 10 feet tall, big wallpaper, and it looks really cool. And the other one was 10 feet by 27 feet, full wallpaper, really, really cool. So if you guys ever get to go to that CIG LA studio, keep an eye out for that. Definitely fun stuff. And the Carrack here, which was my favorite ship that I got to work on the project. So it's a 123 meter long exploration ship. It's meant for finding hidden parts of space, unknown planets, stuff like that, which to me is the most exciting thing about space exploration, is finding what's unknown. And so this one was definitely an enjoyable project for me to work on. And as you can see, I kind of try to go as crazy as I can with the detail and just really figure out everything that I possibly can. That's just my style, that's who I am, that's what makes me happy, and that's what I'm always aiming for with my work. So after August 2016, I ended up leaving the company to go do just more freelance work, which has been, a wild ride so far. The beginning was a little slow, but things have definitely picked up a lot. It's been pretty interesting, where I've been doing a lot of real-world practical design work. Been designing a lot of tires, which for one of the large tire manufacturers that, it'll be crazy to see some tires I designed rolling down the street pretty soon. They're gonna make maybe millions of these tires and sell them all around the world, so definitely pretty cool stuff. But also I've had a lot of time to do some personal work as well, which is fun. After working on Star Citizen for 2.5 years, I felt the need to not think into the future and kind of wanted to go into the past. And I've always been fascinated with these pirate ships and old sailing ships from hundreds of years ago, and the adventures that they would go on out at sea with the unknown of where they're going, what they might find, will they survive the trip. To me, it's kind of like what space travel is today, or going to become when we try and start going to Mars and stuff like that. Just a couple hundred years ago, people would get onto these boats with the unknown of if they'd ever see their family again or where they would end up. And so I started this project and just really wanted to do something different. And once I was like halfway through, I was like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Just the ropes alone and the sails and everything was just like, at a certain point, I'm like, it's too late to turn back, but I wish I never started this. But it's still a fun project. It just like drained me. But that's how I like to work. So I basically like to build this thing as if I'm building it in the real world, but build it in Maya. Also been using a lot of Moy 3D lately, but this is all Maya. And then just kind of like go to town with it, figure out what parts need to go where and how would I make them, how do they work, stuff like that. And then after that, throw it into KeyShot real quick, and then take those KeyShot renders into Photoshop and just build it up and bring that image to life. One of the great things about working in 3D is that you can get multiple angles of what you've created. So you're getting multiple images or multiple pieces of art out of the thing that you've made. And so just the same process again, taking that same ship that I made and then putting it in a scene and trying to tell the story in this one of the ship coming upon a unknown island or an unknown place. What are they going to find there? Does it feel safe or scary or exciting? And then KeyShot, it plays a big role in my process of just exploring what I can do with different lighting scenarios, different moods, different ways to set the scene, and testing things out and coming with a final image that I want to create. After that, I worked on this motorcycle. I've always wanted to do a motorcycle. With this one, I gave myself a quick deadline. It was about a week and a half to get this thing done, and I attempted and potentially failed at skipping the sketching phase and used a reference motorcycle, which I think ended up showing itself too much in the overall design that I created. But nonetheless, it was a fun project and definitely makes me want to do more motorcycles in the future. But yeah, just the same process of figuring out the detail, which detail needs to go where to make it believable, how does it function, are the proportions and the stance right, basing that off of real-world motorcycle designs, and then just kind of trying to create my own unique version of what that is. This right here is basically the render that I get out of KeyShot, and then with a little bit of Photoshop work, really trying to bring that to life. All right, so the SWAT truck. So this thing is kind of my just on and off pet project that is basically going on for who knows how long. Eventually, I want to turn this into a model kit, so potentially 3D printing parts of it and basically building a model kit. That might be a ways away, but this thing's been a lot of fun to work on so far, and I'm going to kind of take you through everything I've been through to get it to where it is today. So right now we're going to go through the exterior, and then after the exterior we're going to go through, I've done the interior for the front cab. So that was that first image you saw at the beginning. And just kind of take you through the way I think about things, the way I approach things, the way I try and tell the story with the design, things that inspire me, stuff like that. So to start, when I was starting this project, I was on my lunch break walking down the street and I saw this big crane truck drive by. It wasn't this exact one, but it was one similar to it. And it was in the middle of the city, and I was like, man, that is really cool. Like, the driver of this truck is sitting in this little tiny cab that is cantilevered off the front of the vehicle. He's in his own little bubble, and then he has this huge monster, crazy large vehicle behind him, and maneuvering that thing, making left turns, right turns, must be super hard. And then not only that, but you're in the front here, and you're kind of like, don't have really good view of your surroundings and stuff like that. And I was just thinking, like, what a crazy experience that might be to drive a truck like that or a vehicle like that, and especially in the city and something like that. So this was kind of my first inspiration of creating that vehicle, the SWAT vehicle. After seeing this and knowing that I wanted to do a police SWAT type vehicle, something that carried a bunch of SWAT officers and higher ranking SWAT officials into intense, dangerous type situations, potentially domestic terrorist type situations, things like that. I went and started to do a bunch of research. So pulled some reference of existing SWAT vehicles, interiors, the way SWAT vehicles are used, where some of the officers hold on to the side of the vehicles when they're rushing into these dangerous scenes, the types of materials that are being used for these vehicles, the shapes, I really fell in love with these amphibious military vehicles that can go in the water and land. I just like the hard angle and the edges and all the stuff that's going on with these vehicles. So collected reference and kind of just started to gain an idea of where I wanted to go. But one of the things I want to talk to before we jump into the designing of that vehicle are some kind of just constant design influencers that I always think about. And these things, I guess they come to me because of my architecture background, my practical real-world design, and then just my curiosity for how things work. So these are a few questions I always keep in the back of my head and try and answer them as I design things. And then I feel like answering these questions always help me to ground my designs in reality so that what I'm creating isn't so far out there that it's unrelatable to my audience. And so the questions I kind of always ask myself over and over and over again are, what are the materials? How is it made? How is it built? And how is it maintained? So the first question, what are the materials? So if we're building a house out of wood, wood planks come in a certain size, usually 4 feet by 8 feet, plywood sheets. Steel sheets come in a certain size, carbon fiber sheets. So all these things, you know, the size of the sheet, the way that they're going to be transported, the way they're going to be either used on-site or built on-site or in a factory, all these things can start to play a role in your concept designs. I think a lot of concept designers go for the what's cool factor, and I think that if you start to kind of break down your not only functionality, but how are these things built, how are they constructed, where does these types of things take place, it'll start to add another layer, another depth of detail and understanding and realistic feeling to your project. So after you figure out what materials you're going to use, what size do those materials come in their raw form, where do they come from? Do they have to be shipped from China? Can you buy them down the street? If you're doing this SWAT vehicle, which could potentially cost the LAPD $10 million to develop or whatever, just throwing fictional numbers out there, but if you start to think of these things in the real world scenarios and how it would really be built, then I feel like your design is going to have a deeper meaning and a deeper level of relatability to its audience. How is it made? CNC mill machines are used a lot. Laser cutters, water jet cutters, 3D printers, molding, hand cut. All these things give you a different type of finish. So if you're water jet cutting a piece of metal, the sharpness of the edge is going to be much more sharp than if you're potentially hand cutting something or maybe even CNC cutting something where the CNC bit might be giving a little bit more radius to that edge. Or 3D printing, what type of materials you can print metal, you can print resin, you can print certain kind of plastics. So thinking about those things as well. So not only the material, but then how is that material going to be cut? How is it going to be made? These types of things will start to influence how you create your shapes, how you treat the edge detail, how do things start to come together. So definitely very important to think about, and then, how is it put together? Is it going to be put together in a warehouse or in a factory on an assembly line, or is it going to be hand-built on-site? How is it going to be transported once it is put together? Does it have to be broken up into pieces and then shipped to other parts of the world? All these things, when you start to just subconsciously think about that over and over as you're designing, it'll help bring another level of realism to your concept. And then I think one of the most important ones I learned in architecture was how is it maintained? When you build these skyscrapers and you forget about having to clean the windows, or if you see a lot of these buildings that have these louvered facades with like metal slats that kind of cover up the windows, and eventually those windows behind are going to get dirty. So how are these window washers going to go and clean those windows, and how is that piece of metal or whatever is covering it going to be opened so that you could get under there and clean it? Same with vehicles. How are you going to clean certain vehicles? How are you going to change the oil? How are you going to access different parts of the vehicle? The reason I think about this stuff all the time is because it'll help me make decisions on where to put cut lines, where to put parts that are going to be maneuverable, openable, stuff like that. And one of the benefits of working in 3D is that you could really start to test these things out. How does it feel to lift the hood? How does it feel to open the doors? And so definitely that's why I work in 3D and why I enjoy designing in 3D is because I can really get in there as if I'm doing this for real. And then one of the benefits of working in 3D is that it's cheap, like working as an architect in the past, when we wanted to experiment and build things, it's expensive, building materials, paying for people's times, getting things approved in the process of planning and approval, for your, sorry, my brain's freezing. But anyways, yeah, getting your permits and stuff like that. With 3D concept design, or any concept design in general, it's cheap, it's free. I mean, it only takes your time, and you get to really explore and almost create it as if it's real. And now that virtual reality is becoming more prevalent, you can really start to get into your designs and really figure them out and experience them. All right, so back to the truck. So starting the exterior of the truck, I had this old model, and I kind of was hoping to speed up the process by basically taking this old model, cutting off the top of the truck, and then reusing the bottom and building my shape on top of that. And so I always like to start very simple, as you can see right here. And I'm actually going to open this model just to show you guys kind of where I get things started. So when I'm starting a project like this and I'm just using very basic shapes and keeping it very blocky and just kind of getting an overall idea of the size and the general feel of the blockiness and how does that relate? Am I getting the bends that I want? Am I getting the folds that I want? And I knew I wanted to create this asymmetrical design where one side, the driver sits on this side, and then the other side is going to have a gunner and a turret. And then in the back, there will be room for transporting officers and a communication center. I knew I wanted to do all that stuff early on. And so it was basically just very simply figuring out how to get that started. And as you can see, I always bring in a scale figure. This guy right here, the average human is about 5'6". This guy here is 6'1". When you start to think about designing vehicles for games or film or whatever, the actors might have bulky gear on, wearing helmets, things like that. So it makes them a little bit bigger. So I always feel like it's better to design for slightly larger than the average human. But at the same time, you don't want to lose that feeling when you're inside of a car where you can't fully stand up. You always have to hunch down. You don't want to lose that feeling, so you don't want to go too generous with the space you're creating. But definitely want to bring your scale figures in and make sure that there's proper room for seating. I put this little thing in here to make sure that the eyesight of the guy is going to work. And then you can really get in and start to figure out or get a good feel for how does that space feel like. And then also in the back here as well, making sure that a guy can stand up there. He doesn't have an enormous amount of room, but since this is a larger vehicle, there's enough room for these officers to stand up if they're gonna eventually jump out the back here or out the side door. And then there will be a doorway that connects these two parts. And so making sure that you have to crunch down when you're going from one part to another, but then when you get in there, you can stand up again. And so it's all about creating a feeling, making sure things are done to a certain scale, and then just getting, in a very general, simple way, an idea of how this space feels. So yeah, start simple and then slowly build up your complexity from there. Next, what I like to do is use the multi-cut tool in Maya as a way to basically draw on the surface of your model. And so and that's, I mean, you know, you can look at your reference if you're kind of interested in certain shapes, or you can just start exploring. So basically, you know, we have this outer shell, and then we know we want windows in certain places, things like that. So you can see that I'm not worrying about quads too much. There's a bunch of n-gons and certain things here. I'll clean all that up later. But what I like to do is just basically come in here and take this multi-cut tool and figure out, like, oh, you know, what'd be an interesting shape to put into the side here, and then you can, you know, start to extrude or whatever you want to do. And so that's basically how I come up with all these openings is doing that, and then looking at different transitions where the points down here might be a little bit thinner, and then gradiating out to thick to hint at structural elements, the ways that the frames might be built around these windows, different areas for light to catch, so certain things like that, and just really in the beginning being very explorative and free with it, and not really worrying about keeping everything quads and keeping everything like super organized at the start. And then you can see here I'm breaking up the vehicle into many different parts, so it's just easier to work with certain things, you know. So in case I want to add an edge loop here, I'm not worrying about where it's ending up around the other side of the vehicle and stuff like that. I'm just able to really work with the parts that I'm interested in exploring, and then figuring those parts out. And so next, just really taking all that exploration to, oops, I mean to save that. So taking that 3D exploration and just really figuring out all the different pieces and how do they work, where are the openings, where are the doors, do they make sense for the height of the scale of the human or the scale figure. And then making sure it's nice and clean and ready to start figuring out the sub-Ds. So that's the way I like to work, is with sub-D geometry. And you can see here I'm starting to add in a lot of my supporting edges so that I can start to smooth this thing. But yeah, definitely keeping certain sides separate and then eventually combining them together later on. But just getting a good handle on one piece at a time and really figuring it out and making sure that I'm getting the results that I want. And then you can see building up the levels of detail and really, you know, these meshes, they become like this huge spider web of edge loops and stuff like that, so that you get the proper smoothing, you know, which can start to like make your brain bleed a little bit sometimes. So you got to just really figure out a way to keep a good handle on it without it discouraging you and getting things too out of control. So this one here is when I finally combine the two pieces, the two like front outer shell for the front cab together. And you'll see that edge loops and stuff aren't lining up perfectly. But basically, like, I've had to add certain edge loops in for this radius so that I can keep that perfect. And then those have to die off into something. I made sure to add thickness to the shell so that, how is it going to be built in real life? How thick would that be if this is a bulletproof metal? What materials or how thick does that metal need to be with the frame inside, with all the electric wires, all these things running through? How thick does that need to be? So kind of not figuring it out so it's perfect, but having a decent idea of what it takes to get there, and then adding that into my design. And then when you do start to come into problem parts, I usually just like to hide them on parts of the vehicle or the mesh that aren't going to be seen. So starting to triangle things off in certain areas where spirals might happen if I try to continue them to go all the way around. And at this point, I know that I'm not really going to be cutting into this vehicle so much anymore, or into this mesh anymore. And so just really, like, when it's more towards the final, you can start to cheat things a little bit and get away with things that you might not have been able to get away with earlier. I like to keep my meshes as quadded as possible because that's how Maya works. If you want to insert your edge loops, or if you want to start beveling things and stuff like that, you're going to get your cleanest results when things are quadded. But once you're past that stage where you kind of have it all figured out and you just have these extra edges that need to just die off, you can totally do it. And as you can see, keeping my scale figures in there and making sure that things are continuing to feel right, and this vehicle is feeling exciting and something that I want to continue to work on. Starting to add in gun turrets and extra details. So at this point, I'm kind of like at a halfway point on the exterior of the project. I send this render to a friend of mine, Travis Bourbeau, and he basically was like, feels really cool, but the wheels are feeling a little bit small. The overall vehicle is feeling a little small. The front fender here needs to be more aggressive. And so he sent me back these kind of notes, and I was just like, oh man, it's going to be a pain in the butt to update all this stuff, but it's the time to do it, And so definitely go back in. I wasn't super happy with the tire design. It was a little bit rushed. So I went back and redid the tire design and really enjoyed it and got into it. And I'm definitely happy that I did that. Part of the 3D concept design is a back and forth of creating something that you think is cool in your head. Once you make it, you're like, oh, it's not as cool as I thought it would be. And then having that decision or that design lead you to the next decision to help you move forward and finally get to something that you like. All right, so, and then eventually it got to this level where the exterior was fully created. So I'm gonna open this model. Hopefully it doesn't take, it got pretty heavy, so hopefully it doesn't take too long to open, but yeah, so it's basically, and that's the way I like to work with 3D concept design, is that you're really figuring out the details and the functionality and the way things work for each part of the design, where a lot of 2D concept design is more to me like a beautiful sketch, where you're leaving a lot of unresolved parts to the imagination. And so it's just, different ways of approaching design and what your final goal is. I'm just kind of, the way that my brain works is really getting in there and figuring it out so that it can be built for real, and tackling everything down to the nut and bolt, all the way to the large silhouette. It's just the way I like to work, and kind of what makes me tick. And so it's just a different approach to how these things are created. But one of the the drawbacks of doing that is the files definitely get a bit heavy. And so you can see here everything's built sub-D'd, quads for the most part. And then I get all the way down to the bolt, these little stairs. The idea for these parts here, it's such a small detail, but the idea is that this can like rotate in. Part of the reference that I collected on SWAT vehicles is you have these officers hanging onto the side. So I built in all these little areas for SWAT officers to put their feet and then kind of hold on to these bars as they're rushing into these dangerous situations. So you have these little ladders to get there. So I had to imagine how would the officer grab one handle, put one foot on the tread of the tire, push himself up to the ladder to pull himself up to get up there. All these little things that I feel like in 2D concept design you can figure out to an extent, but it stops at a certain area. And then with 3D, you can just take it a bit further. And not to say 3D is better than 2D, it's just the way I like to work. Let's see, in the back here, eventually this whole thing's gonna open up, and so I don't have it animated yet, but eventually I'm gonna put in like a ladder, and this is the way that the people in the back here are gonna get in and out, or through this side door. There's also these hatches at the top that they can come in and out. But yeah, to me, that's one of the most exciting things about 3D concept design is that you can literally create your design from every angle. You can get as close as you want to it and then back up as far away as you want to make sure it's working on all levels. And then you can really get into the spaces and start to see what it feels like to be in this vehicle. So for me, it's getting as close as possible to what it would be like to do this, to be in this in the real world, even though it's a fictional design. And one of the things I like to do is change the focal length on my camera. So it's more of a fisheye. So when you're in these interior spaces, you can have a much larger view of what's going on. So that was all the way to the exterior, fully designed and modeled at this point. And then the next step is to render it out and do the Photoshop work. So what I'll do is I'll send this thing into KeyShot just by clicking this button. I'm not going to show you guys with the truck because it's a heavy scene, but I'm going to show you guys how I do that later on with a grenade. But then once I get the render out of KeyShot, I like to take my renders into Photoshop and basically do a little bit of paint work and wear and tear and stuff like that to bring those images to life. One of the things, and I think this is, even if you're not a concept artist, if you're a 3D modeler and you focus mostly on 3D modeling, I think a little Photoshop touch-up of your renders that you put online can really take your design a long way. So as I will show you here, the things that I like to do. So basically, this right here is my base render straight out of KeyShot. This one has the textures put on it, or the labels put on it. And then I just start building things up a little bit. So working on the background, and then you can see here all the labels are gone. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use different render layers to scratch away at labels, at paint, at show a little rust, a little metal, stuff like that. So you can see here, especially if I zoom in, if I turn this mask off, you can see where I've scraped away at some of the labels. So let's see, I kind of want to show you guys how I do this. So if we get like a nice scratch brush, and then we go into this layer mask here, and painting with black into this white mask, we can just really easily start to scrape away all that extra stuff. And the reason I'm doing that is to add a little life into the stiff render, and then also to tell a story that this vehicle isn't meant to be kept pristine. It's not meant to be kept beautiful. It's meant to rush into dangerous scenes and dangerous situations and really, get in there and knock things over and crash into cars if it has to, run over trees, things like that. This right here is an all steel pass, and so basically when I turn the mask on, you could see that it's barely showing in different areas. And so that's the same way that I like to do things. Now I'm painting white into a black mask, but you can start revealing the steel. I always use this curvature mask here and that you can get that out of KeyShot just to select different colors and different areas. The curvature mask is showing where certain curves are greater than a certain degree angle, and so then you can highlight that area and then paint into the mask. And you can see that it's now just starting to scratch up the edges. And so it's really subtle. If we look at this whole render and we turn that on and off, there's not too much to it, but it adds a little hints of coloration and material and stuff here and there. Same thing if you do that with the rust. So you can see this whole rust material, and it's really simply placed. It's not like I did my UVs for this and hand placed where all the rust is going to go. You can see that it's repeated, but when you're just using it as a mask and you're just revealing it in certain places, it doesn't become a problem. I also like to add dirt to kind of show streaks and to show that this thing moves forward, moves kind of fast, brushes up against things, maybe has water that runs down the side, all this different type of stuff. The way I like to do my dirt is there's this brush that I have. Let's see, where is it? Here it is. So it's this grunge brush, and what I'll usually do is I'll just stamp it, put it into place wherever I want it to go. So I'll find some nice edges for it to match up with, and then skew it or transform it into place so that it fits with the perspective. And then I will select that area, and then with another grunge brush, I will into either a dark or a light dirt, I'll just paint into the mask. So you can see that, so it's basically using two types of grunge to come up with these streaks and little areas of dirt here and there. And so I just go by hand per render. It actually becomes kind of fun finding areas where the vehicle would bang up against a wall or something and then start to scratch off the paint and then have a little dirt. I like to have dark and light dirt because it adds a variation into these surfaces, and then shows a little rust for hints of color pop and stuff like that. We can turn off. And then also, it's really easy to get carried away with it because adding all that dirt can be kind of fun. And so making sure to tone it down afterwards and make it so it's not too out of control. Darkening the tires a bit, I made them a little bit too light. Adding a little bit of glow to the lights to make them more moody and a little bit more interesting. Adding a little brightness to the overall image, using this ambient occlusion layer. So rendering that out of KeyShot, basically the dark shadows and the tight crevices and stuff where light doesn't reach. That really helps to get the geometry to pop. So if you turn that on and off, you can see it's a very subtle difference, but it definitely makes a difference. And then, yeah, just continuing to build it up a little bit. Some small tweaks with brightness, contrast, things like that, and eventually getting that final image. And so if we look at the final compared to the straight out of KeyShot render, KeyShot's doing a great job to get us to a certain point, but that Photoshop work really takes the moodiness and the excitement of the image a bit further, and really helps tell the story. So, okay. So yeah, so once you're at this point, do a couple renders showing off all the design work that you did, showing off that you really thought this thing through, that the back door works, the details are all over, showing both sides and how this asymmetrical design feels from one side versus the other. And yeah, you're good to go on the exterior of the design. So now moving forward to the new work that I created for you guys here, jumping into the interior in the front here. So this SWAT truck, it's not your typical SWAT truck where you have a driver and a passenger and then maybe a few people in the back. You have two cabs to this. You have the back cab and the front cab. The people in the back, they're getting ready to jump out of this truck and rush into danger. The people in the front, I imagine to be the more high-ranking officers, the ones making the calls, and kind of wanted to treat the front cab or the front space of this truck as a command center, something that has a lot of communication devices, maps, screens, has the gunner turret, has a weapons rack, has all this different stuff. So to get started, the first thing I do, now that from my exterior design of this vehicle, I have this overall shell already in place. I kind of put these seats and stuff as placeholders already because I knew when I was creating those renders, let's see, you can see a little bit like the seats and stuff in there. So I made them in the beginning just because I knew you were going to get hints of them in the final images, but they were by no means at this point a final design. And so then just kind of starting to lay out the space and making sure that the character still fits. It had been a bit of time between when I created the exterior to the interior, so the first thing I did was I created this floor design and I raised the whole floor up, whereas before it had like a dip in it, and I totally forgot that the reason I had the dip there is so the guy's head wouldn't get cut off. And so I had to go back and fix that because I made that mistake. But as you can see in the top corner here, I'm starting to use Moy 3D in this process to really get in there and start to break down or start to design something a little bit. It's a little bit, I don't know, it's a different mindset. Moy 3D is a modeling program that works with solids, whereas Maya and Max, they work with polygons. So solids are NURBS modeling, and it's a different mindset, a different way to think. But I found that I have a friend named Claudio Ladvac. He's out of Croatia, and he uses Moy a lot, and he showed me a great way to integrate Maya with Moy, which I'm going to show you guys in a bit. But it's become a lot of fun, and I've been using it a lot more lately to really have a great time exploring my designs and creating stuff that I want to create. So here's an example of in Maya creating really simple geometry, bringing that into Moy, in Moy modeling the communication center, and then bringing that back into Maya into the model. So I want to show you guys that process because I think it's pretty powerful and pretty enjoyable. So let me see. I think this is the right one. Might take a second to open. And that's so basically what I like to do. So let me see if we go back to this part here. I'm basically just trying to figure out different areas of the interior that are going to have different functions, and then I treat each area as a mini design project. So the floor, take a day or half a day or whatever just to focus on the floor and figure out how much detail needs to go there, what makes it start to feel realistic, taking into consideration things like this floor grate that I have that's perforated. What material is that going to be made out of? Okay, it's going to probably be made out of steel or a certain kind of metal. How am I going to get those perforations? It'll either be water jet cut, CNC cut, the stuff I was talking about before. What size panels would that come in? Breaking this down into a panel size that once the overall outer shell of this vehicle is built in the real world, somebody would have to hand place that in. It would probably be a couple people. How heavy would it be? And then if you make these panels too large, they will start to bend and warp. And so, even though we're building this thing in a fictional world in the computer and none of that's actually going to happen, but by me thinking about that stuff while I'm creating it, I think it's starting to add that next level of realism into the design, which makes it a bit more believable. Let's see if the file opened. Doesn't look like it. And so that's the kind of stuff that I like to do, and I think helps, bring an extra level of excitement to concept design. But, there's definitely no right or wrong way to do it. It's just whatever works for you. But, I definitely wanted to share that part of my process and something that's been ingrained in me for over 17-ish years of design education and professional practice. So yeah, we're starting to get into the heavy model files. So it's going to always take a little bit longer to open. All right, cool. So you guys may have seen a lot of people have been using Fusion a lot lately, and so Moi is really similar to Fusion. But I tried Fusion, I just couldn't get into it. I love Maya, and so I set up Moi to be very similar to Maya, and then I can interact in between them very easily. So this communication centerpiece right here, as you can see, it's just a very simple geometry. Everything's quads, nothing spectacular. What you do is you export that as an OBJ. OBJ. And then send that out, and then you open Moi, and Moi doesn't come standard like this, but I've basically set it up so that it's pretty similar to Maya. And so bring in that OBJ, and now you basically have your polygon is now turned into a solid or into a NURBS piece. And usually at this point, what I'll do is I'll rebuild this thing. So I'll just trace it. I'm going to show you guys a couple different ways that you can use polygon models in Moi. Let's see. So now we have, before I do that, oh yeah, we got that there, okay. So I basically just built a curve, and now I'm extruding that curve. And so I basically just rebuilt that shape, but now with a clean Moi NURBS piece. And so I'll give this a new name. And so you can start editing this, the geometry that you get from Maya. You might have a few little problems here and there, but it'll work pretty well. But I like to rebuild it just because the Moi NURBS geometry is going to have a lot less issues. once you want to start editing it. So if we wanted to start cutting into it, and start editing it, it's really easy and becomes pretty fun. And so that's one way, you can work from Maya into Moy, start to do your whole modeling, designing, editing in there, and then basically take it to here. And so you can see it's really simple stuff, really easy to cut holes in, to fillet edges, to separate material parts or different pieces, and build things out. And then once you're at this point, you can export this as an OBJ. And then you could decide if you want n-gons, quads, triangles, or triangles only. I always choose n-gons, and then you can avoid smaller than, because it'll basically start to create, like if you see here, if we zoom in and we do that export, you'll see that it's starting to show you how many polygons it's creating to make that shape. So you could, increase that. I usually increase it pretty high, and then my model files get so heavy that I hate myself. But so you got to be careful. I've definitely learned the hard way. I always just want to increase everything and put in millions of polygons. But then, so you can avoid smaller than, something like that or whatever, and basically export this out now as polygons, and then when you bring that back into Maya, so if we open the next one, well, let me see, that's what's next? Then anyways, you can bring that back into Maya, and you'll get that piece in Maya that you can now put into your larger model and then interact with it or do whatever you want with it. So that's one way I like to work with Moy. I don't know if many of you are too familiar with it, but I started using it a couple months ago, and now I use it so often. I even use it professionally on some of the tire designs I've been doing. So certain things, especially things on curved surfaces where you want to start cutting things in and out and still have that perfect curvature, but then be able to edit that on the fly or really easily without having to worry about topology and things like that, I found it to be super useful. And then it's just, sometimes you too much in Maya or too much in Max, and you want to give your brain a break or use your other side of your brain. And so I almost feel like that's what it is, where polygons is one side and NURBS is the other side. Like, you can do certain things in polygons so much easier than you can in NURBS. And so I almost found like it's a really great way to kind of blend the two together and enjoy the design process. So this grenade here is something that I want to kind of take you through. And even though it's such a small object, this grenade goes onto that weapons rack and another part of the design of this truck. So even though it's such a small part of the project, the same process that I use for this is going to be the exact same process that I use for the larger vehicle. It's just render times take 100 times longer or whatever, So if we open that grenade, I think it's this one. Yeah. So this grenade, I think I made in about an hour, maybe a little bit less. So it's nothing like super fancy or super special, but I don't think design needs to be overcomplicated to be anything special. It just needs to be sleek and unique and interesting. But you can see that, like here, this blue part here is a cylinder. And let's say we wanted to, for some reason, add some, I don't know, finger grips or something. see. Why is this? All right, cool. And so if we bring that here, select those two, cut that, and then now you can really easily, cut into this shape where in Maya with polygons and using sub-D techniques or whatever, it's like doing that is just going to be like a brain bleed problem to solve, on its own. And in Moi, you can do that super quick in here. And then if you want to start adding some fillets to the edge, let's see. Fillets are the one thing that don't always work perfectly in here. I heard they're trying to update that for version 4, but you can see work just fine. So super easy way to just get in to your 3D design and just start exploring. And in my opinion, it's just really fun. So after that, I export this into Maya. So I export it as an OBJ, and then in Maya, I, let me see, model 10. So if we open this one, should be just the grenade. And so this what I'm showing you right here is pretty much my workflow of Maya, Moi design. So modeling, design in Maya and Moi, then in Maya I will clean everything up. You can see my outliner right here is really clean for the most part. It just has the grenade in its own group. If you have certain, like the truck, each tire will be in its own group. Each thing will separate left side from right side. So because when you start to send these things over to KeyShot, KeyShot has its own outliner that you can use straight from Maya to start turning things on and off. And then what I'll also do is in my hypershade here, I'll just set up simple materials, and I'm labeling them like Z red, Z black, Z whatever, and I like to put Z before it because when I send it into KeyShot, I'll know which materials are the ones I made from Maya and then which ones are the KeyShot materials once I drag and drop different materials. So KeyShot 6 has this really great plugin for Maya that you just literally press a button and it will send your model over to KeyShot. And so now you're able to be in this nearly real-time render, and you can start exploring how do you want to start adding materials to this thing. In the beginning, I wanted there to be like these different colors and stuff for the breakup of the material, but then in the end, I went all black. It has a very nice library of different materials that you could choose from to just really easily drag and drop. And so the reason that steel is updating this part, the gray that was already steel, is because I had assigned that material in Maya, and then when I brought that over into KeyShot, it just knows which materials to update as that. So yeah, it's really fun. It's really easy to test things out and see, which direction do you want to take things in. You can also add labels. But what I'm going to do, and then I also like to test out different lighting scenarios. There we go. And so usually what I'll do is I'll drag different HDR light setups. So KeyShot comes with a library of HDR environment lights, but then you can also import your own. And so what I'll do is I'll usually give it a solid colored background to start with. So then you're just seeing how the light affects the material. And you can just test out different lighting scenarios just super quick. Try and find something that looks good. Usually I end up going with usually like these sunset or sunrise environments always have the best lighting. Really soft shadows, beautiful color ranges, stuff like that. So you can just do that, and then in KeyShot Pro, you can add pin lights, you can start to add different types of things that will help add a little bit more mood to your scene. Let's see. Shouldn't be taking this long. Oh, there it goes. So in here, if I want to add a red-ish, let's make that a little bit more orange. So usually I'm working with multiple monitors, so it's hard to work on just this one, but so I added this orange pin in there, and you can see it's starting to highlight there, but let's say I wanted to turn that highlight, I like how it's basically adding this like orange rim light, but let's say we wanted to set that highlight somewhere else. You can literally just come in here and set it to different parts, and oh, maybe that looks good. You can adjust the shape, you can adjust the brightness, the radius, all this stuff, and really start to get pretty quick results. One of the reasons I love working in KeyShot is just you're staying in artist mode. You're not worrying too much about, are these settings correct, or is this thing going to take forever to render, or whatever. You're just kind of getting real-time updates, and then you're able to really quickly test out different scenarios. So if we look at the scene that I ended up creating for the grenade render, let's see. Hopefully it won't take too long to open. Which this is basically like the final result of that. But you can see it's just like a really simple concrete floor, brought in some bullets, I got some guns and an axe, and put a little bit of labels onto the model itself, and then did that same render, Photoshop paint over to bring the images to life. So let's see. Yeah, so that's how it is in KeyShot. If we look at this material, you can see that this like smoke graphic is just put on as a label, and then I can go in and move the position of that around if I want to. Yeah, so the reason I like it is basically, quick and dirty texturing. You can properly go in and do less Photoshop work and more work in your render in KeyShot if you want to, but that's not what I like to do because it takes a lot of time just dialing in certain things. So I like to get my renders looking as good as I can within a certain amount of time, and then finish those off in Photoshop. And so, and so just to show you the full process, it's basically similar to what I showed you for the exterior, but I just want to walk you through it real quick. Yeah, so that's the base render, and then just slowly building things up. You can see little things like this. It's just, I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's just little dirt and little stuff being added to the floor just to break up the repetition of that concrete texture. Similar thing that I did with the steel. So you can see that I'm just scratching away at that black paint just a little bit in certain areas, just to show, a little bit of life in these things. And then there's like really minor adjustments to get the overall image looking from this, which, I think is pretty decent. It's a really great start, to that as a final, something really moody and it just tells an exciting story. All right. And so even though, that was the whole process for the grenade of basically working in Moi and Maya and then bringing that over into KeyShot and then bringing that into Photoshop, and even though it's just a small grenade, it's still basically take that from something as small as that all the way up to a truck or a spaceship or whatever. It's all the same thing, just at a larger scale. And so yeah, these weapons here, they go into the weapons rack in the vehicle, but at this point I had been kind of getting tired and mentally exhausted of working on that truck, and so I kind of just wanted to like render and make some new images. This Vector gun is a model that I had started 3 years ago, and then I totally forgot about, and I found it. It was like 90% done. I found it on my hard drive. I was like, oh, I should finish it off and throw it in the vehicle. And so, these little props are what kind of start to bring the vehicle to life. This right here, the dash, is another example I want to share with you guys about how powerful Maya and Moi can work together. And so I'll show you guys that real quick. And so one of the things that in Maya I like to work in with sub-D modeling techniques. So basically it's polygon modeling, but you're smoothing that model or using smooth mesh preview to get the shape that you want for that model. So this piece here, you can see that I have my supporting edges so that when I hit 3 to show my smooth mesh preview, I'm getting that curvature that I want, which is determined by the distance the supporting edges are to the main defining edge. So if I toggle between 1, so it's super hard, to 3, you're starting to get the nice rounded highlights that you would get in real world if you look at anything like a table or a chair or anything. You never get those super hard CG edges unless you're doing something like a water cut or maybe a laser cut or a CNC, but eventually when things start to rub on edges, they start to smooth out a little bit. And so basically, with this right here, if I do that same export, let's see, where is it? Export selection, export as OBJ, and then open up Moi, and then import OBJ. Where are you? Hold down a second. Oh yeah, I forgot. I have to do this. So import that OBJ, and then you can see that basically it's come in unsmoothed, and so now there's a script that is called subdiv beta 9, and I have to click this first, and then it smooths that model that you brought in like it does in Maya, but now it's smoothing it permanently, but it's also converting it to NURBS so that you can start editing it in, so then you can start editing it in Moi here as a solid. So if we, let's just say we, all right, let's give this a shot. The only thing is it's going to start to be a little bit buggy because it doesn't necessarily like that the way that geometry is built, but you can see like just super easily starting to cut through and you're able to edit that geometry. So that's another really great way that I like to work with Moi and Maya mix. So you can, one, just bring in simple polygons and then convert that to NURBS, or you can bring in these smooth mesh polygons and subdivide that, and then work on it as if it's a NURBS surface. And then you can see here, I just built out that dash, added in a bunch of like knobs and buttons and stuff for communication, places for speedometer and techie screens, map screens, stuff like that, the steering wheel, all that stuff. And then you get this on the right here, which is, you know, the amount of detail that I want in my design and in my model. And so then at this point, you know, basically after doing all these mini design projects where the weapons rack and the communications center was kind of a mini design project, these first aid kits is a mini design project, the floor panel is a mini design project, the model file is getting really heavy, so I have to kind of break these things up into their own files and then reference them into the final file. But really just like I'm adding the amount of detail that I find in my research on, you know, what would it take to build these things in the real world, and kind of take it as close as I can to that level into each part of the vehicle. And then the same thing with the seats as well. Making sure that the person can sit on them, that they're comfortable, that they have the right type of seatbelt to hold these people into place if they get into, you know, knocking cars out of the way and stuff like that. And then kind of bringing it all together here, you know, chopping off half the vehicle so I could see what the inside looks like, and what you know, eventually I'll replace these guys when I design my own character. These are just placeholders, but really starting to get a feel of what it's like to be inside this space. You know, and from that initial crane truck that I saw driving down the street, you can kind of see the driver here. He's almost in his own little world, even though the whole cab fits 4 people. When he's driving in there, he's pretty much in his own little space. And then the gunner, he has this little platform that he puts on top of his seat so that he can stand up and reach out the top. And then, you know, making sure that the person can fit in there. There's little escape hatches in the back here as well. And then doing that same process, sending that model, making sure it's nice and clean, materials are kind of predetermined, sending that over into KeyShot, and then making this image of kind of transporting you into this vehicle. What does it feel like to be into this in this space, as if it was built for real? That's the goal that I'm always trying to reach with my work, and I feel like, you know, whenever I see this, I use this as my desktop screen now. Every time I look at it, I almost feel like I'm in that truck. Feel like it would be really exciting to drive this thing or rush into some like scary terrorist situation in this thing. And then let me see. I just wanted to walk you guys, you know, really quick through the Photoshop file of this interior as well, to kind of show you how I'm adding mood and story, and taking these kind of nice base renders out of KeyShot and adding a bit of life. All right. So this right here is my base render out of KeyShot. It has all the labels on it. Then I do another render with the labels turned off so that I could scratch away like I showed you guys. And then this is the result of showing those scratches and the wear and tear on those labels. I wasn't super happy with what I had originally done with the floor, so I added another bit of detail to the floor there, using like halogen tube lights instead of just an overall flat light surface. Adding a bit of texture from Photoshop, or from photos from online into the leather, into the white leather. Let's see. Adding a few stickers and extra labels that I hadn't originally put in. Doing that same thing where I'm adding dirt. I don't know if you guys can see that. It might be a little dark up there, but I hope you guys can see that. But yeah, like just adding little dirt streaks and stuff like I showed you guys earlier. And then also doing the same with the dark dirt and the light dirt, so it's a little mixture of both. When you look at streaks on your windshield of your car, you'll see definitely where like darker dirt builds up, but then you also see where like almost looks like it's white dirt or something that's kind of streaking as well. And then, let's see, what is this? Oh, just some more scratches. Even though this cab, this front cab is a small space, so you wouldn't really build up atmosphere too much. But to really show depth, you kind of want to add atmosphere into a space like this, even though it might not be super realistic. But it definitely starts to push things a little bit further. And then a lot of those overly detailed areas that you have all the way in the back there start to get faded out and muted because they're getting covered up with this light layer of haze. And so that really starts to dial down detail in certain places and starts to create separation. And so that, it's not, everything doesn't always feel like overly detailed and in your face. You're still able to have that detail there, but then mute it into the distance and kind of hide it. Adding a little glow and lens flares and things like that, changing up making a little bit less saturated, adding a little photo filter to change the warmth, adding a little vignette to the edges, a little brightness here and there, adding a little bit more separation so you could see that a lot of the values are really blending and things aren't separating or popping enough. So a lot of the geometry is staying like kind of blending from one to the other. And so just adding little haze in there really starts to help certain areas pop where edges are. And so it's really subtle, but then it's really helps to kind of make each piece like its individual part in the overall image. And then also adding in a little bit more of these decals. Part of creating an interior space, like you're designing the shell, you're designing the pieces that go in it, but really what you're designing is this negative space of where the human interacts, where the character walks and stuff like that. And so when you start to add pieces of geometry or things that kind of jut into the space, you can imagine when somebody's walking in there, they're going to bump their head on this edge right here. And so pointing that out almost with this arrow and then saying caution, low head clearance, kind of verbally saying watch your head, you can imagine that when the person or the character is walking through this space, when they get to that point, they're going to like move out of the way. And so part of designing a space, whether it's architecture, a building, or a vehicle, or digitally, you're designing the space they interact with more than you're designing the actual outside. And so I'm doing certain moves purposefully to have to influence the way people interact with this space. A little more vignetting to just keep the focus into the image, and just a few more steps to really bring the overall image to life. So if we, I always like to do this, but yeah, if we, look from the original render straight out of KeyShot, it's pretty good. Definitely a great start. I could take it further in KeyShot if I wanted to, but I love to get into Photoshop and add a human touch to this and really add a bit of moodiness and life into the image. All right, so and then, since we did this thing in 3D, one of the benefits is you've designed every inch that you could possibly think of. You've put in all the nuts and bolts. You've figured out how everything works. How would one move through this space? How does everything kind of feel? What are the sizes, everything? So now you get the joy of creating a bunch of images out of it and really telling the story of what this whole space is about. So this is from the other view, basically looking from right behind the driver's seat towards the back, showing off the weapons rack in the communication center, showing off these passenger seats, how they feel, how it would feel to sit in that space, showing off where the gunner stands or the guy who operates the turret. Eventually, I am going to design a SWAT officer to put into this thing and into my never-ending project. So, eventually I'll incorporate those in. What it feels like to be in the driver's seat, and then just another view of that. You're kind of in your own little bubble. You have your gun and your extra ammo and your smoke grenades and the stuff that you need. When you're rushing into this dangerous situation, you have the stuff going on behind you, but you still kind of feel enclosed and in your own kind of little space. And if you can imagine, you're sitting here with the whole entire vehicle behind you, and you're kind of like extended out over the front and just driving like super fast into some crazy bomb threat or something. I don't know. That's the feel that I was like trying to go for, and that's basically what I wanted the front of this vehicle to feel like. And so, yeah, that's it.
Okay, do we have any questions here on the stage? Yes? Awesome. Thank you, Gurmukh. That was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I have a question. Does it differ to model cars for like entertainment and game design compared to everyday cars in real life? So what do you think about that? Does it limit you as an artist, or just give us like your opinion on modeling cars for like regular cars every day and modeling cars for games?
I mean, I've never modeled a real car for the real world, but the way that I like to work is I like to treat, so even the spaceships that I designed for Star Citizen, I like to treat them as if I'm doing them for real, but it always depends on the project that you're working on. So certain game studios might require more of a 2D approach to concept design versus on Star Citizen, they really wanted 3D concept design because the CEO and the director, he really liked to see those designs in 3D, rotate them around. He liked to use the camera in Maya as a camera in the real world. And so it definitely depends on the project you're working on, but when I say that I like to kind of base my designs in reality, I'm not going in and really figuring out how the engine works or how everything works. And, I'm taking it to a certain point and then making those details feel realistic, but I'm not figuring it out 100%. But I think that my approach to the creation of these things is to treat them real and then have that show up in the final product. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions here on the stage? Yeah?
Hi. I was wondering, could you show a little bit about KeyShot, like interior lighting, how you set that up?
Definitely. So the interior lighting, especially for this interior scene, saved me because when I brought that whole interior scene into KeyShot, it was made up of like 4 different models that all came together into one. And then I hit render without the interior mode turned on, and it was going to take like 48 hours per image to render, and for some reason I forgot to turn the interior mode on, and then once I finally turned the interior mode on, the render took 4 hours to render, so it literally saved me almost 2 full days of time. But it's really simple. This thing is mostly interior. There's openings in here because I have the doors turned off in this version of the file. But if we send this over to KeyShot, it's literally just a click of a button to switch it into interior mode. So let's say, I guess it doesn't really matter, but and it might be hard to see because I don't have any of the lights and stuff in here at the moment. So this might not be the best way to show it, but I'll just show you literally how you turn it on as you go into lighting here. And then in lighting, you have your different basic, product, interior, full simulation, custom. You just click interior, and basically what that does is it changes the mode down here. Interior mode, you have global illumination on, self shadows, and then these ray bounces, indirect bounces, those are all basically your light bounces that are happening. And so this interior mode it changes the way, I guess, the render is calculating the light and stuff. And so it's, you know, and I don't technically know what it is doing to the actual render, but what I do know is it makes your renders really easily happen in interior mode. And it's literally a click of a button. And that's what I love about KeyShot is it's very minimal interface, so you're not changing too many sliders, you're not scratching your head on what numbers to do where. You have your library of materials that you could drag and drop anywhere you like. You can set up your light sources super easy, and then just hit render.
Are there light materials?
Yeah. So if you go to light here, you have these like area lights, emissive lights, IES profiles, point lights. So there's just a bunch of different lights. So like what you see, these screens here, I use emissive lights. They always tell me not to, but because the emissive lights, they have a bit of graininess that comes off them when you render, but I actually kind of like the grain. But then behind the glass here on these halogen lights, I used area lights as the light source for those, and then also the lights underneath. So all those area lights are what's lighting the scene along with the HDR environment on the outside, but that HDR environment's coming through the glass, so it's not lighting it that much. And then it's really those area lights that I'm applying to a piece of geometry that brighten up the scene on the interior and give me all those nice lights and shadows and everything, and then using Photoshop to enhance it or tone it down if I need to.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Have you always used KeyShot with Maya, or is this like something you switched to at some point?
No, I used to use Mental Ray, and then I used to use V-Ray, and then when I started working on Star Citizen, I was using V-Ray, and then one of these renders, let's see, all the way at the beginning. Sorry. Here we go. So yeah, these renders here, I actually had to send these images out to this guy, Chris Olivier, to help create the images because I was really tight on time and the deadline was coming. And so he rendered these in KeyShot, and I was like, man, those look so dope. And basically he was like, yeah, you know, because the way I had sent them the model, he's like, your model was perfect, just really easy, drag and drop the lights and materials and the glass and everything on there, and then really easy to make these images. And he basically showed me in 30 minutes like how to do it, and I was like, okay, I'm sold. And this one here is done in V-Ray. And the thing with V-Ray for me is I just could never figure out the settings so that things wouldn't take forever, and especially interior scenes with all the bouncing lights. Like I remember one design I did for Star Citizen was this little camper scouting ship that had like a little room in it with a bed and a kitchen and stuff, and rendering that image at like 1500 pixels took like a day and a half, and I was just like, I don't understand, like I can't do this. And then rendering the images that I did for here for the SWAT truck, I mean maybe in V-Ray it's better now. I haven't messed with it in a long time. It's been like 3 years almost. But I feel like this image would have taken me like 3 or 4 days to render, and in KeyShot I got in like 4 hours. So yeah, I mean, I'm sold. The only thing, and I've talked to them about this, is I hate having to leave Maya to render. So you're kind of like, if you ever want to like move stuff around or whatever, you have to use the KeyShot. You have to use like, let's say we're in here. So like if I ever wanted to just move something around, I have to select the part and then this and then use their move tool, and it's not very sophisticated. And so like in Maya where you could snap things, so that's the one drawback. But I mean, for me, I stay in artist mode and I really enjoy just like not having to worry about settings and all these things, and then just getting the results I want so that I can create the images that I want to make.
Do we have any more questions in the stage? We have one that's coming on Twitter. So John, he's also chatting on live chat. So hi, John. He's asked, when you're modeling asymmetrical models, would you typically model the entire thing asymmetrically, or do you prefer to model half and then mirror and alter it from there?
No, so I like to basically start asymmetrically. You know, like I showed in the presentation here, when I started this vehicle, I started, I started here by figuring out the overall shape, and starting it off asymmetrically because, mirroring that stuff over isn't going to help me in this point. It isn't going to help me in this project. Certain things are, so like in the back here, it's symmetrical, so I do mirror certain stuff over, but I like to, from the start, know what each half is kind of going to look like as its overall shape and base silhouette, and then work on each side individually. But yeah, definitely, I mean, one of the benefits of working in 3D is that you can reuse parts over and over again. So one of the reasons I like to do 10-wheeled vehicles is because you can do one vehicle and then duplicate it, however many times you need to, and you have all this extra detail that you got away with creating one part for. So definitely the parts that you can reuse, do it as much as you can, but do it in a way so it doesn't feel like you're just skimping on the design or taking the easy road out. Like, do it in a way where it makes sense for that design.
Cool. So at like Cloud Imperium, your models, so obviously you're in the concept design team.
Mm-hmm.
Were they then taking your 3D assets and using those, like sort of repurposing those as the game assets?
Yeah, so they would take the 3D design that I did, and then I would send that to them. I wasn't worried too much about poly count and having everything set up for the game. What I was worried about was the design and basically getting the design approved by the CEO. And then they would take my design and take it further. So one of the things that I saw as a great benefit to 3D concept art is that when the 3D modeler gets it, they're not looking at 2D perspectives that could be a little bit wonky or off. They're actually getting something that's accurately modeled and built. And then they're able to take that without having to really start with a rough block in and stuff like that. They're almost like have all that created for them with the art that I've given them and the model I've given them. And then they can add their own level of design to it while they're making it work for the game and take it to the next level of something that's even cooler. And so I found that to be a really cool part of the process of it's almost helping the next team have a head start on the work that they're going to do, and then they can make it even better than what I had created.
I do love that about your stuff, how it's always thought about from like, right down to the person. Like, can they walk around? Will they hit their head? I love that.
Yeah, I think that just comes from my background and just, dealing with the building and safety department too much in the real world.
Yeah. We actually had a question from Hassam as well on Twitter. He said, what it got you interested in designing architecture originally? So what got you into that before you then switched?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I was really big into a few things. One of the things was skateboarding. I grew up here in Los Angeles, and so part of LA culture is to be a skateboarder or a surfer or both. But then also on top of that, really in school, I enjoyed art class. I took it as an elective multiple times. And then I also really enjoyed painting, physics, math. I was always terrible at English, still am really bad at spelling. But it was the problem solving side, the art side. And then when I was a skateboarder and I would, jump downstairs or grind handrails or like do stuff on benches. It started to get me to think about buildings in a different way, whereas normally I think most people kind of take for granted what buildings are and don't really notice them. We almost just like use them and walk through them and experience them like subconsciously, but without like really noticing what they're doing for us. And I think skateboarding kind of opened my eyes to the built environment. And you know, this was in 2000. Gnomon, I think, opened in '98, and I literally went to high school like 5 minutes from here, and I had no idea this place existed. I wish I would have known, but I didn't learn about this place until like 2006, and I had already owed $100,000 in student loan debt, so I was like, I can't afford going there anymore. But like, you know, I wanted to do something creative. And when I got into the architecture field, school was so much fun. Doing these design projects was a lot of fun, but then professionally, it wasn't creative enough for me, and that's kind of, I think, what led me to look for something more creative as a career. Yeah.
Cool. Do you think, since you worked at a game studio, do you think you would go down that path? Like kind of, you know, change your workflow, go more into like creating game assets, or on the other side, like would you like to work in movies or?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely so what I love about concept design or being a digital artist is just creating things that don't exist, and everything that I create, like this interior or this exterior, all these things that I've created, you know, they didn't exist before me, and now they exist. And you know, online you can reach all ends of the world, and so, you know, that's one of the things that I really enjoy about what I do is creating things that don't exist and bringing them into this world and having other people enjoy them. And definitely a few things that I've been toying with is, you know, I do really enjoy 3D modeling. Would I enjoy doing that, of modeling other people's work? You know, it's kind of been a question on my mind of, is that a route that I maybe should go? Because I get a lot of opportunities to take jobs like that, and you know, they're kind of hard to turn down, but I think ultimately for me, I would just really love to create my own things. And then I definitely would love to work in the film environment. You know, I'm working towards that. Right now, I'm doing a lot of real-world design work where I've done a bunch of medical products, stuff for surf companies, doing these tire designs for one of the large tire manufacturers, which are really cool. They're for like big Jeeps and really big, like kind of monster type truck wheels. And so I think my ultimate goal, once, you know, I'm an old man, is basically I want to have my own concept design studio that doesn't just focus on entertainment, but can do concept design for architecture products, entertainment, and that's where I ultimately see myself going. But you know, that's many years down the line.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Any last questions? No? Can we have a round of applause, please, for Gurmukh? Thank you so much.
Yeah.